welcome back to WD18, the Watford Fan channel. Welcome back to another interview. This time we've got former Watford striker and all-round legend, Tommy Smith with us today. Tommy, how are you doing?
Good morning. Very well, thanks.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks so much for your time today, buddy. I really do appreciate it. We've also got Sam, of course. We did an interview with Jay Demerit last week. Really good interview, so if you could go and check that, would be great. I was just saying, Tommy, it's 21 years ago since the 99 playoff final. How quickly has that time gone?
Yeah, it's flown by. That was my first dip into kind of a successful season, really. I've been involved slightly with the first team squad the season before on the promotion then, but I had more and more involved that season. So for that to be one of your first seasons, getting in the playoffs, ending up at Wembley, it was incredible, really. So looking back, very lucky, really. I didn't really realise at the time, I think, how big and how rare these occasions were. So for me, it was probably, I feel like we should get to Wembley every season and involved in a playoff or some kind of cup run. But no, it was brilliant. Great memories.
Can you think of anything better that's happened in your career, or is that up there?
It's definitely one of the highlights. I've been fortunate enough to have been involved with a few promotions, etc., when I've played pretty much all season and probably felt a bigger part of the team. I think because I was young and dipping in and out and was mainly in the squads for a lot of that kind of build up to probably the back end of the season. I was fortunate enough to play in a couple of games and score a couple of goals on the way, which was great. But for me, it's just a learning curve more than feeling part of the squad. I think it was such a quick rise and just trying to soak up as much as I could at that time. So brilliant memories, but I've probably got ones that maybe just sit above it because I was a bit more involved throughout the season.
Can you remember, Tommy, and maybe give an insight to the viewers about GT's preparation to that game? Obviously a massive occasion. Was it a case of obviously the players knew how big the game was, but can you remember maybe the build-up? Did he do anything in particular to get the team up for it?
He didn't probably do anything specific for that game, but I think as the season progressed, he would generally always keep you on your toes. So he'd always introduce little things like days out, team bonding sessions. He was always well ahead of the curve, I felt, Graham, when it came to players and the mental side of football. So we were using a sports psychologist at that point. So we would have regular meetings with him about a lot of them were wacky, crazy meetings.
Really?
He kind of asked. I remember one vividly where he went around everyone saying, "What is the most dangerous animal in the jungle?" And he went around everyone asking them what they thought, and everyone was coming out with all these. It's definitely a snake or a spider or alligator. I think the answer in the end was the injured animal. I think I don't know, but so there was lots of quirky things going on at that time. So I think he was good because he always kept you fresh. But leading into the final, it was probably more just a case of settling nerves. He had so much experience of big games. So I think for him, it was just build the confidence levels, but try and keep you, don't let the occasion get away with you.
How much of an impact would you say Graham had on your career as a whole?
Massive, huge. Because it wasn't just the fact he gave me my debut, but it was more probably about what he did behind the scenes on the training ground, his methods that he installed in me to say, look, and what was great was he was very clear on the path for me. And he said, look, if you go out and you can do this and add this to your game, then you've got a real good chance of becoming a first team regular for me. Which was great because I was very strong at certain things, but I was always quite slight. I wasn't overly physical. I didn't like physical battles at all. So he said to me, look, you can't get in the first team playing the way you do. You're going to have to start, getting involved, manning up, start getting hurt. And he'd come up and watch me play in the reserves. And when I did it, he'd be the first to come over and say, that's exactly what I'm looking for. So he had a huge say in the way I was kind of moulded.
Do you think he was probably the most influential manager on your game at your time at Watford, or just in general in your career?
That's a good question. He was one of them. There definitely, in terms of coaches, 3 or 4 that had big influences in my career, kind of probably from, when I was serious at Watford, probably under 14, 15 level, through to getting into the first team, so him, the ex kind of Watford team players that had kind of been at the club for a long time, like Tom Wally, Luther Blissett, Kenny Jackett as well was my youth team manager for a while. They were all fantastic and all tough men as well that kind of let you have it when you needed it. And I needed that. I was the kind of player that needed a rocket every now and then to say that's not acceptable. You can't just play when you've got the ball. You've got to make sure you're involved all the time. And that for me was I needed them breathing down my neck.
Did you find that intimidating, Tommy, in terms of having those big characters in the dressing room during that period? Because Watford obviously were doing really well under GT, and obviously he's a big character himself. But in terms of maybe the more experienced players, as you coming through from the academy into the first team, what was that like, seeing those big players, as you mentioned, in the dressing room?
It was brilliant. It was quite daunting. It was quite a daunting dressing room to go into, and they were tough characters as well. So, if in training, they would certainly let me know if they thought I was not doing things properly, or if I was trying to, for example, Robert Page, he'd kick lumps out of me every day in training. He'd always come over and pick me up, and then after he'd talk to me and kind of tell me why he's doing it. And he'd be like, look, you're quicker than me, so if I let you go around me, you're going to make me look stupid. So he said, every time you run past me, I'm going to kick you. So, at least he told me, and it was fine. So there were some big characters that were in the dressing room, but part of the learning curve, really, of coming through. It's a bit different now, I think. A lot of those big characters can't get away with probably what they used to, but it's just how football's evolved, really, now.
And as you mentioned, Tommy, in terms of coming through at Watford, made your debut, was it at Oldham? Against Oldham in the 2-1 win?
Yeah, Oldham at home.
Yeah, Oldham at home. Could you maybe talk to the viewers, because obviously we have maybe a younger audience, but who might remember you from your second spell at Watford, but in terms of how maybe your journey started at Watford, being a local lad and coming through the academy?
Yeah, of course. So it wasn't an academy then, so it was just like a youth team setup, I guess. Each club had one. I actually got released from Watford at must have been under 12. I was behind the curve of what was expected at that point. I was quite a late developer, so it wasn't really a massive surprise. I came to Watford and was probably here for about a season, off and on, and then got released at under 12. Went and just played some local football, played for Hemel Comets, played for school, and then got re-scouted at a county trial. Hearts County put on this big trial. I think there was about 5 games going on. And one of the Watford scouts was at that and said, look, come and train with us again. And it just kind of snowballed. So I think that was the under 14 season. And I'd grown a bit, filled out a bit, confidence was starting to come into my game. And really it snowballed from there. I was never really first on the team sheet, but I think as I gradually got more confidence and gradually grew a bit, matured a bit, got offered a YTS in the last season, so I'd have been under 16s. And then just kind of had a great first year in the youth team. I think I scored 28 goals in 30 games. So I did really well, really good first step into full-time football. And that's really when I got on the radar for Graham, and I was fortunate that Kenny Jackett was youth team manager, who then stepped up to first team coach. Well, he was manager, then stepped aside to let Graham join as head coach, and Kenny was his assistant. So they're always looking to bring young players through. I remember it was a night game against Oldham, and it was the day before, and I was having lunch, and Kenny Jackett came over and said, how would you like to sit on the bench tomorrow? So it was just completely out of the blue. They were just short on, they had a few injuries, so the squad was a bit light. I think nowadays players have to really prove themselves and go out on loan. There's such a big, I think it's a lot tougher for young players to get in first team squads now. Because clubs now are delving into the whole of the world to recruit, whereas probably when I was coming through, it was more English-based players with the odd kind of European player dipping in and out of English football. But now it's a lot tougher. So I think the curve was a lot quicker.
You say when you got scouted for a second time, at that point in your life, were you always a striker, or, were you experimenting in different parts of the pitch, or did you always know, like, I want to play in this position?
No, I moved around quite a bit. I was always an attacker. I've never liked really tackling or heading the ball, so I was always quite creative. So I started playing centre midfield, but then as I got a bit bigger, I was quick. So I think because of that, I ended up playing up front, and that's generally where I stayed as an attacker. So I came through as a centre forward, and it was Graham Taylor that played me more wide, and that's kind of when I was. It was probably about around 20, 19, and that's kind of where I ended up staying a bit more wide. I did play through the middle on occasions, which I enjoyed, but I think I made my name more as a wide player.
First goal, was it away at QPR, attacking the away fans? Yeah. What was that feeling like as a local lad? That obviously, as you mentioned, a really quick rise coming through the youth setup into the first team. You were, wasn't it that season you made your debut? What was it like scoring that first goal? And I think I watched an interview. The club made a compilation. You said you'll never forget that moment for the rest of your life. Is that still something you think about now?
Yeah. When you talk about, you mentioned earlier about kind of highlights in your career, that for me is one that sits pretty much at the top. Again, I was dipping in and out of the squad all the time, so I never really knew if I was going to travel with the first team, if I was going to be involved, if I was going to start, be on the bench. Graham was very ruthless at just kind of throwing you in and then pulling you straight out. He had no qualms with doing that. So I think one of my first starts at Watford, I think he pulled me off at half time. And he just said, you didn't do enough. So it was quite ruthless. You never quite knew where you stood with him. But yeah, that was incredible. I turned up at the game, didn't realise I was going to be on the bench, got put on the bench. We went 1-0 down. Nicky Wright scored a fantastic goal to make it 1-1. And literally threw me on, and we needed a goal. So I thought, there's no way he's going to put me on, because you wouldn't risk, you put someone with a bit more experience on. But yeah, that was brilliant. He trusted me. Obviously, QPR knew nothing about me either. And yeah, threw me on. First touch, played it wide. Second touch, put it in the back of the net. Literally, 30 seconds after coming on. So I didn't know what to do with myself, really. It was one of the worst celebrations I've ever seen. But I looked at the pictures of me scoring the other day. I looked like I'm about 12 years old. And the press officers often say to me, the ones that were at the club at the time, no one knew who you were. None of the press. Yeah, so we had to kind of fill them in. Oh, this is a young lad who's come through the youth team system, etc. Because nobody had really heard of me.
That's amazing, actually. And I know you, obviously the goal kind of involved Richard Johnson as well, and you're still close friends with Richard. What was he like as a player? Because Watford fans absolutely love him, just for his energy, his tenacity in the midfield. Can you maybe give us an insight into how he was like to play with, and also the relationship you had with him, not only when playing but also now with the club?
Yeah, well, firstly, he used to scare the life out of me, because he was quite quiet. And he didn't say too much around the dressing room, but he was tough as nails. So he was the kind of guy you wouldn't want to get into a tackle with in training, because he wouldn't hold back, And there were 3 or 4 players like him. But yeah, he frightened the life out of me. So it took me a bit of time to warm to Richard, because he was. I didn't quite know how to take him. But he's a great lad, and he was one of them that would always be talking to me, always be kind of offering his advice. But he was a great player. He really was. Kind of underrated, I felt, really, with what he offered. And some of the goals he scored were just phenomenal.
In terms of Richard, I don't know if there's any other players, but I know you mentioned the impact Graham Taylor had on your career. But was there maybe certain players in the dressing room that maybe, particularly when you were younger in that dressing room, some big characters that helped you particularly coming through?
There's probably not ones that I would single out. I think you took little bits from every player, really. Watched their attitudes, how they trained, what their preparations were like, what they did in the dressing room before games, afterwards, what they ate. So for me, it was just a learning curve from all of them. When I came through, probably just after Gifton Noel Williams. So me and Gifton played up front in the youth team together for a little while. And when we were a bit younger. So I probably took a lot from him, really, because he'd done the same journey as me, but probably 12 months before me. So, me and him were quite close, and we'd talk a lot. And I just probably watched him and learned from him a lot. So he had quite a big influence in me.
As you mentioned, Tommy, massive highlight, obviously scoring your first goal for Watford. I mean, I think that the other goal that everyone talks about with you, particularly in your first spell, is that goal against United in 99-2000 season. Is that, again, another big highlight of your career, scoring against United at Vicarage Road? Still a young player at the time as well.
Yeah, it was. That was just... Man United then were like best team in the world, probably. And so it was a big game, not just for me, but for the club as well. Man United coming to Vicarage Road. So to be able to start that game was just fantastic. But then obviously to be able to score as well. I think it's one of the only few goals that I probably not got emotional about, but it really hit home. Normally, you don't really... when you score, you're elated, but you're kind of caught up in the game in the moment. Whereas I think that was probably one of the only goals that I've ever scored that actually it felt like a massive goal. And I felt a bit like, Jesus, this is quite a big moment for me. And it kind of hit me straight away. Normally, it's when you get home and you start kind of downloading everything, you take in everything and you start thinking about consequences of what's happened. But with that, I think because, Man United, I grew up kind of with Man U as the biggest club in the country and the best players. So to be able to score against them, it hit me straight away.
You mentioned already about how great Man United were in that time under Sir Alex. But who would you say was the greatest player you played against as a whole in your career? I think about the great Premier League defenders of that time, but who would you say was the hardest defender you ever played against?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to play against some fantastic players, but directly up against would generally be defenders, so centre-halves, full-back. So it is a bit easier for me to comment. And definitely, without doubt, the best I've played against is Jonathan Woodgate. So I was fortunate enough to be in an under-21 England squad with Jonathan, and he was just immense. He had everything: quick, strong, good on the ball, composed. And he was. We did a lot of kind of 2v2, 1v1 stuff. And I was always really good at that, being quite tricky and quick. And I was quite agile, so I could turn really quickly. And I honestly couldn't get around him. And there aren't many in training that I'd come up against that I felt couldn't get around. Yet he was just, he was almost impossible for me to get around because he was as quick as me. He was stronger than me. And he just kind of almost read my mind. So about 2 months after that, we played Leeds away at Ellen Road, and I started up front, and he played centre half. And this was the Leeds of old. They had a fantastic team then, and he was I thought he was on another level to everyone. So it didn't surprise me that he went on and played for Real Madrid, etc. I think he could have had a better career if it wasn't for injuries. But he's the best I've come up against.
In terms of your game, Tommy, just touching on that and how hard it is to play against certain defenders, how would you approach, say, someone like Jonathan Woodgate? Would it be knocking it... Well, as you said, it's hard to get past it, but would it be knocking it in behind, or would it be dropping deep or making different runs to come in short? How would you approach maybe the tougher defenders, particularly in that 99-2000 season when you stepped up from the Championship to the Premier League? What was maybe the difference in the way you approach defenders and how your game changed maybe?
I think the quickest thing I learned was to not expect to do great things every time you got the ball. I think for me, I grew up thinking, right, when I get the ball, I can do what I want with it and I'll create a chance or score or have a good touch. Whereas I think there's a quick learning curve that when you play at that level, you can't get away with doing things like that. So it's about percentages, making sure you're in the right place. If it doesn't happen for you, don't let it affect you, because you can quickly lose your confidence really, really fast. And before you know it, you've had 3 or 4 bad touches, and it's really hard to get back from that in a game. But for me, I was always one that I always tried to work harder than the person I was up against. So, for example, like Jonathan Woodgate, I'd just try and run him into the ground. So I'd make sure I'd be moving him all the time. And just the older I got, the more I realised that so much of football's in your head. And you can often, players will ball watch. And for me, and this is what I say to my son all the time, it's you've got to never switch off in football. So when somebody else is watching the ball, you've got to be thinking, right, I'm getting myself in a position that I can get the ball before him, or where's the ball going to end up? So you're always constantly thinking. And that was probably something I learned more as I got older. But when I was that age, it was more just for me about trying and work harder than the opposition and try and get them tired, so then they start making mistakes. And as you know, you only need kind of one opportunity as a forward, and that's your chance to score. So,
how did you see that change across your career? Because I imagine you were a bit more of maybe a nippy player running in behind, but maybe towards the back end of your career, it's maybe dropping a bit deeper. What was that change like?
It's a tough one, to be honest, because I relied a lot on my pace and my agility. So as I got older, I was still fairly mobile, but that explosive pace goes away, and you can't leave people. So it's quite a tough thing to adapt to, more probably mentally than physically. But yeah, it's like with anything. I think the more you play and the more you, whatever job anyone's got really, the more you do it, the more experience you pick up. And you start, when I was younger, I never really thought too much about the opposition and the player I was up against. I just went out and played my game. The older I got, the more I realised that actually I need to think about who I'm playing against. You know, what's his stronger side? What does he like doing? What does he not like doing? Right, if he's quicker than me, I need to make sure I'm dropping off, pulling into space so that I give him something to think about. You know, and I think it's just trying to make players uncomfortable that you're playing against and not make it easy for them. So as you get older, you do start realising that I haven't got the pace anymore to knock it and run round them and maybe go to the byline. So then it's more about just trying to beat them with your movement as opposed to just physically trying to beat them.
We mentioned that Premier League season, Tommy. Obviously, we did get relegated that season. And then I think, what I've been reading, obviously I was a bit young to remember, but you individually did progress when, obviously, we went down level under Vialli and the Lewington as well. I think it was under Vialli, you were top goal scorer in the 01-02 season, if I remember correctly. What great to obviously see Vialli on the mend as well. I know he had his health
great
as well. But what was your relationship like with Gianluca in that season?
Mixed, actually. We got on really well. Then he came in and gave me the number 9 shirt and said, "Look, you're going to be my main centre forward," and it was brilliant, and I loved it. And I learned a lot from him actually, in that he brought in a whole backroom staff of Italians that. So the culture changed completely in the club, from what we were eating, the way we trained, our fitness regime. So that was quite tough to acclimatise to. But actually, it was a really good environment to be in. And to have someone like him as your manager, particularly as a centre forward, it was great. Because he loved always, you know, training was always about scoring goals, etc. So I learned a lot from Gianluca while he was at the club. But sadly, that season didn't pan out too well. There's a bit of financial issues once we got, I think, towards the end of the season. But also I got offered a contract, it's funny, looking back, I probably would handle it completely differently now. But at the time, I wasn't happy with the contract I'd been offered. And there were players that were on big contracts at the time that had signed under Vialli. And because I'd come through, I was on considerably less than them. So they offered me something. And I felt I should have been, as the main centre forward for the club, I felt I should have been on par with the players that had come in. But the club didn't see it that way. So unfortunately, it didn't end up that well when Vialli left. We weren't really getting on that well. I think he felt I should have just signed the contract and carried on with my football. But I think my agent was advising me at the time. And it was one of those really tricky situations that I think on reflection, I probably should have signed it. But, you know, you live and learn. This is part of the process.
You know, I mean, Watford have had plenty of off-the-pitch politics in terms of the ownership and financial things. But does that ever affect you as a player in terms of, you know, you mentioned how you were unhappy with the contract you were offered and that kind of thing. Does it affect you a lot as a player? As
funny as it sounds, it kind of does in a way. It shouldn't affect what you do on the pitch during the match day, but it certainly affects your mental state. So, and when you go into a game, you want to feel you're 100% fit, and you want to feel that the manager supports you, that the fans are behind you. And when part of that is missing, it definitely does affect. Some players can deal with it better than others. Some players don't care, and they just, that's the way they are. That's the way they've always been. They'll just play for themselves. Other players need that support network around them to make them, to get the best out of them. For me, it was probably at that stage, it didn't really affect me. But having said that, I think I scored 11 goals up until about Christmas. And then I think I got 1 or 2 after Christmas. So, and that was kind of when the contract negotiation started. So I felt it didn't affect me, but actually the goals dried up. So it probably did.
That season, top goal scorer at Watford, potentially the relationship with Vialli could have been a bit better towards the end of that season. Then Ray Lewington comes in. What was the differences like there? Was it a good relationship with him?
Yeah, I mean, Ray was the reason I left the club in the end, because I got on fine with Ray. I've got, and I see him now, no problem at all. But at the time, I felt like I was mishandled with that cup run. Scored in the last 16 and the quarters to get through to the semi-final. And then he started Michael Chopra in front of me for the semi-final, who was a lone player. And I just felt that was a kick in the teeth. And I couldn't, at the time, that for me was like, if Ray's here next season, I'm not staying, because you can't do that. I'd scored in the 2 rounds before, not got us there, but had a massive part of it. And then to be dropped for someone who's on loan, it just really, it's like a dagger in the heart.
Did he pull you through a chat, Tommy, at any point to say, "Oh, I'm not going to be involved for this reason," or was it literally on the day of the game?
No, he did. He did, in fairness. Yeah, he did tell me, which is better. I have turned up to Wembley later on in my career without not thinking I was going to play, and I didn't. So that was worse. That was a worse scenario to be in. But in fairness, he dealt with it the best way he could, and I just felt his decision was the wrong one. But I would do, because obviously I wanted to play. But yeah, so that was tough. But he's a good man, and he's a good coach. I've got nothing against him, but just at that time, I was like, I needed to move on. Really, I think I'd stalled a little bit. I think my career had plateaued, and I just think the club were like a mid-table championship club, and I felt I needed to test myself, really. And it's my hometown club, and it was probably all a bit easy. So I think I'd made up my mind at that point. That had given me the kick I needed to go, right, I need a fresh challenge.
Would you say, I know you said it was your hometown club, would you say that was a difficult decision, or do you think, it was the right time to move on after the 6 years there?
It's difficult. Yeah, really difficult. Because actually, not a lot of clubs had much money then, because we were just getting over this. I think it was ITV Digital went bust, that had given clubs $5 million a year in the Championship. I think it was something like that, and it had gone bust. So a lot of Championship clubs had signed players and had used that money, thinking it was going to come in, and all of a sudden it wasn't. So there wasn't a lot of money around. So I ended up coming back to Watford the following season out of contract. I wasn't old enough to go on a Bosman, so Watford had to keep paying me my monthly wage, but actually I was out of contract technically. So I then was going on trial at different clubs. So I was kind of close to looking at another career at that point. I was kind of, I don't think I went down that route, but I spoke to my dad a lot and just said, look, I think I need to possibly look at maybe going back to college and doing something, because I'm not guaranteed to get a club here.
Wow.
So yeah, I went to some good clubs on trial. Kind of went to West Ham, Charlton. I went out a trial over in Perugia in Italy. And then Mick McCarthy called me from Sunderland and said, look, come up for a trial. So I went up and ended up signing there. So, but yeah, it was a bit of a precarious position at that time for me.
And just going back, Tommy, before we look at your second spell when you rejoined the club in the Premier League, just talking about that FA Cup run, the retake penalty actually against Sunderland.
Yeah,
but I've got to ask you about this, right? In terms of retaking a penalty, what is going through your mind? Because it's a pretty unique situation. It doesn't happen to a lot of players. What was that like? Were you thinking, you know what?
Horrible.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, no, I was exactly what you'd imagine. I was pooping myself. I was thinking, gee.
In front of the away fans as well.
Yeah, and pride kind of kicks in. So I'm like, I've missed the first one. It was a terrible penalty. I've got a second chance now. There's no way I'm not taking it, for one. Not because I was confident, just pride. It's like, how embarrassing for me to then let somebody else take it. So I think Hyder was playing. I'm sure it was someone, and they would go, no, I'll take it. And I was like, no, I'm taking it.
Really?
Yeah. And the second penalty was terrible as well. It was so lame. Like, you could see I kind of half pulled out of it. And the keeper dived past it, and it hit the inside of his hand and went in. So it was dreadful, but it went in. I'd love to say that I was like uber confident and I was going to score, but I wasn't. I was like, please go in, please go. I didn't know where I was going to kick it. I think mentally I shouldn't have taken it, but that just something steps over. You just think, come on, right, you've got to put this right.
Just sorry, I don't want to keep going on about the semi-final, but in terms of the decision from Lewington not to play you, what did he feel that he had over you which would impact the game to favour?
Well, I think there were maybe 3 or 4 games between the quarter-final and the semi-final, so 3 or 4 league games from memory. And we went up to Burnley, and it was that crazy game where I think we won like 7-4 or something, and Chopra scored 4. So he was on good form, to be fair to the lad. So I think I wasn't banging him in by any means in the league, but I just seem to have a knack in the FA Cup of scoring. I kind of have through my career, really. And I don't know, I think he just felt, I can't remember exactly what he said. I think probably just the red mist came down.
Just before we move on to your second spell, talking about football as a whole, how important would you say the FA Cup still is, considering you saw how much it meant to all of us as fans last season when we got to the cup final? Do you think the romance of the cup is kind of dying out now, or do you still think it's got a massive part to play?
Well, I still think it's got a massive part. I think the problem is for the bigger clubs, it's less of a prize now. And it probably is a fixture that gets in the way of Champions League and Premier League football and whatever it might be for them, international games. They're if you're a top player now, bar the Carabao Cup, it's probably the next one up. And so there's that. I guess to win the FA Cup probably isn't what it used to be 20 years ago for these clubs, because the rewards are far greater winning other cups. And the notoriety is better as well, really. On a CV, an FA Cup 20, 30 years ago was amazing. But now I think, the big players want to win the European Cups or European trophies with the countries. And, so I think it does get in the way for them. But certainly for the Championship down, and probably midway down the Premier League, where you're not going to win the league for clubs that are, like Watford's probably at the moment. For us last year to have that cup run is just fantastic. What a way to bring the town together. The semi-final against Wolves was like a cup final for us. Brilliant. So, for me, it's not lost any of its kind of what it's about. I think it's a great competition.
Tommy, we'll fast forward a little bit. Obviously, you left Watford for Sunderland, then Derby, where you scored, I think it was 20 goals in 90 games. Good return. Watford had just had the playoff final. We were speaking to Jay last week about it. Obviously, a great day for the town. Could you talk about that summer, maybe? Did you have interest from elsewhere? I think I read an article where Sheffield United were linked at the time as well. Was it a no-brainer to come back to Watford to play in the Premier League again, or was maybe there were offers elsewhere that you thought about?
Billy Davies had joined Derby, and it was a really weird situation where my contract was running into its last year. The club wanted me to re-sign, but they didn't offer me anything. And Billy Davies kept saying to me, I want you to come into my office and tell me you want a new contract. And I said, well, offer me a contract, mate. But he wouldn't. So it was really bizarre. And then Neil Warnock rang my agent in the summer and said, I want to bring Tom down to Sheffield United. So Sheffield United had just gone up with Watford that year. So I was like, great, that's sounds good to me. Let's get this moving. And Derby were making it really, really hard work. I think there were 2 Sheffield United players going to Derby and me going the other way. So there was a lot of negotiation going on. And I was living in Derby, so I was thinking, well, do you know what? Sheffield's not far away. I could maybe commute or whatever. We won't be too much of a drastic move personally in terms of location. And then I was literally heading up to Sheffield United to sign when my agent rang me and said, Watford are interested. Clubs agreed a deal with them, same as Sheffield United. What do you want to do? And for me, it was a no-brainer. So I just went down to my wife and said, look, I'm going down to Watford to sign.
Wow.
And it was as quick as that, one phone call. So I've been messing around with Sheffield United for about 3 months. Played a 10-minute phone call. I was going back down to meet Adi and Boothroyd at the ground. We had a wander around the stadium, and he kind of explained everything about what he'd done, what he's introduced, where he wants me to play, why he wanted to sign me.
What was that conversation like with Adi, actually, Tommy? Because obviously you haven't worked under him before, but I mean, a lot of Watford players, and Jay, as I mentioned, Jay was saying it last week, such a positive man around the place. What was that phone call like? What did he say to you that he thought you'd bring to the table at Watford?
He, as Jay probably would have said, he's so positive and he's such a good motivator. Very similar to Graham Taylor, actually.
Really?
Very similar in the way they speak to people. So, you come off the phone or after a meeting with him and you feel like you're walking on the clouds because, he knew everything about me. He'd watched me pretty much all season with Derby the season before. Had shortlisted me. He'd run managers I played for. I mean, he knew pretty much everything. And he kind of just said, look, this is what the team needs and you fit that mould perfectly. And for me, I felt I left the club under a bit of a cloud. And I think a lot of the fans then thought I left because I was being greedy, which is probably a little bit unfair. I ended up signing at Sunderland for a worse contract than what I was on at Watford when I left. But I understand because I didn't sign a contract that Watford had offered me. So, I could understand why there was a bit of a cloud. So I was desperate to come back and show that I'd improved as a player. And I was desperate just to show kind of what I could do because I felt I hadn't shown my best for Watford really, and I turned into a better player. So for me, it's a great opportunity as well.
And how do you reflect on that season? Obviously, we did get relegated. I remember actually that was my first season being a season ticket holder at Watford. I remember you scoring. Okay. It was against Arsenal.
Yeah.
That was actually one of the highlights of the season, I think. Really.
Yeah, it was really. Yeah, there weren't too many that year.
Yeah. Just looking back on that season, where do you think it maybe went a little bit wrong? Was it maybe the lack of investment in other areas, or was it just the quality in the league?
Do you know what? We were a good side, but I think we were a really hard-working, physical side, and we were probably a little bit one-dimensional. And Adi was brilliant, but I think what had got us up as a club, I wasn't there then, but from what the players told me was it was a very direct style. Getting the ball into the box, getting the ball wide, and just trying to overpower teams, and you can't do that in the Premier League. And I think we tried and it didn't work, and then we didn't probably have the right squad to then try and evolve quick enough. And look, we huffed and puffed, and I think there's a stat, if every game finished after 80 minutes, we'd have finished 14th or something. So wow. It was like we were always trying to keep our head above the water. And you can't do that in the Premier League, and we didn't score enough goals. But we were competitive. We weren't an easy game to play, but we just probably lacked a bit of quality, really. So after a course of a season, if you're at the bottom, you deserve to go down. You can't argue it.
Yeah, I mean, Jay Demerit mentioned this in terms of, as you said, that we kind of didn't hold on to our points until, the last 10 minutes, and the Chelsea game when we threw it away in the last few minutes we spoke about with him. When in the dressing room, like how hard is it to kind of pick yourself up when you concede in the last minute and go back to training on the Monday? It just must seem so difficult.
Yeah, it's hard. It is hard because the longer the season goes on, the further the kind of the lows get lower. So it's harder.
Do you look at the table a lot as well?
Oh yeah, of course. It's impossible not to. I would always constantly look at the table, look at the fixtures coming up, going, right, where can we pick up points? Who've our competitors got? Oh, they'll drop points there. If we can try and get a win here, we'll jump above. So that is constantly going on all the time. It's impossible not to. Yeah, when players say, "Oh, we don't look at the league table, we don't worry about where we're going to finish," I think that's complete rubbish because you can't not. As fans, you do exactly the same thing, and different as a player.
I imagine that's probably the same at the moment with the current squad. But in terms of that season, we got relegated, Tommy, and then you actually again we got relegated, and you had another brilliant season, playing the season in 07-08. We had a great start under AD. I think we were top at Christmas, if I can remember correctly.
Right.
And this is actually a question we got sent in from someone. What went wrong halfway through that season? I know we finished in the playoffs, but it seemed that we did tail off when the likes of Adam Johnson and Gavin Marn and Marlon King went.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't think it was so much personnel. I think the Championship's such a long, tough season, and we hit the ground running and we flew, and we kind of felt we were going to win every game. We got to Christmas. I can't remember what the turning point was, but it was like teams had figured us out again, and we were still probably too one-dimensional. And a lot of our game was about getting the ball out wide, getting balls in the box, long throws, corners. And I think teams just figured us out, and it seemed like they just came and defended really deep, didn't give us any kind of space to get in behind them, put loads of defenders in the box, and then would hit us on the counter-attack. And the more we pushed and pushed, the more we got hit on the counter-attack. And it's really, once you lose momentum, it's tough. It's hard to find it, and players' confidence dip. And that's kind of when you can feel it. You go on the pitch and suddenly not as many people want the ball, and the crowd's quiet, and you're almost expecting to lose. And we kind of got ourselves in a bit of a rut, and we squeaked into the playoffs with I think Blackpool away last game of the season. Bizarre game. Henderson got sent off. I think we were 1-0 down. And we needed a point to get in the playoffs. So thankfully we picked up a point just. But Blackpool needed a point to stay up. We needed a point to get in the playoffs, and we scored about 10 minutes ago. The last 10 minutes, I've never played in a game like that, where neither team attacked, neither team did any. It literally, all the players were saying, let's just keep it in the middle of the pitch, because we'd pretty much got what we needed.
Yeah. I mean, going into people must have been saying match fixing was going on there. I mean, going into the next season, 08-09, I mean, we have to talk about that ghost goal against Reading. Obviously, the videos, Chris Kamara was like, what's going on here? And I mean, what's it like as a player? I mean, surely you went in at half time, like, what is going on here? What's going through your head when you see that happen?
It's just weird. I mean, I tell you what really wound me up was Reading, because they kind of celebrated the goal after it had been given up. Surely they should be saying, it's gone wide, like, let us score or something, but they did nothing. I think that was the thing that wound us up the most. Like, refs make decisions, and that one was just unbelievable. How he made that. Still to this day, it's impossible to make that decision. But yeah, I've never been a ref in front of thousands. It must be horrible having to make it. But still, for me, it was more Reading. And I'm sure Reading got a penalty as well in the second half of that game.
I think they did.
Sure they did. Didn't we draw 2-2 in the end?
Yeah, because we went 2-0. You scored, didn't you, Tommy? What's it, John? Is it John Joe at all? Yeah, I think he scored.
Yeah, and then
I'm 2-0 up, and then I think
I think he gave them a penalty after giving them that goal. I'm sure he did. It was one of those days that you just, like, the world's against us.
Yeah. and just in that season as a whole, Tommy, obviously, you scored in the 3-2 win away at Coventry, I believe, on your 300th appearance. Obviously, that's a great milestone to hit. And then just the season as a whole, was it three managers in that season? We had AD, Brendan, and Malky. Could you maybe...
The Watford way, 3 managers.
In terms of Brendan, I know he got a lot of stick when he went to Reading and we played him at the Majeski. I mean, that was... I can't remember. Similar to the Marco Silva, really, recently. Yeah. What was that like as players during that season? Did you kind of have an inkling he was going to leave? Or...
No, not at all. Not at all. So he left in the summer. So AD got sacked fairly early into that season. And we all thought Malky would get the job, actually. And then out of the blue, they employed Brendan Rodgers, and no one had heard of him. And I loved Brendan. For that 10 months he was there, or however long it was, loved it. He was fantastic, brilliant coach. I think I learnt more from him in that period of time than I probably did from any other manager. Yeah, loved it. Thought it was really good, just in terms of his preparation for games and the way he trained you through the week in preparation for how he wanted you to play on the Saturday. So I can't speak highly enough of Brendan. So it was a real shame. He rang me. I was on holiday in the summer, and he rang me and said, "Oh, Tom, look, I'm leaving. I'm going to Reading." So I was gutted because I'd loved playing under him. I think I got 17 goals that season playing for him. I was gutted when he left. But then obviously he tried to take me to Reading a couple of months later.
I think we've got to touch upon this goal you scored for QPR against Watford. And I've literally always wanted to ask you, from when I was at the game until now, and what was that like? A local lad loves Watford, scoring for QPR, and I think it was very respectful. You didn't celebrate. I've never held a grudge against players who celebrate. I think that's pretty unrealistic because it's hard. But I feel that was really classy of you. What can you maybe talk us through the emotion? You must be elated that you've scored, but also was there a part of you that was like, this is against Watford?
Yeah, it was strange. It was really strange. There were so many different things going on at that time because QPR, I don't know if you are aware of this or can remember this, but we had a possible points deduction on because one of our players from Argentina had illegally used an agent, and the club were aware of it. Apparently, like one of these third-party agents that owned the rights to him as a player. So we were pending the results of that. So even though we knew if we won that day we could have gone up, that was kind of in the back of everyone's mind. And then, of course, coming back to Watford, Malky was the manager who I played with. He was a good friend of mine and still is now. So there was so much, right? All my family were there. And it was a great day, really. It was fantastic. It couldn't have gone better from my point of view. But also, when you go back to your old grounds, you want to play well. You want to do well. As a forward, you want to score because, again, it's that pride thing. You want the club to go, oh, God, we miss him. He's a good player. I wish he was still here. And that's what you want. So, it was a great day. And look, I'd always, Watford's my hometown club. So I would always you never know when you score what you're going to do. But I think the relief of that going in for us winning was probably more than anything else at that point. So my celebration, it was respectful, but also it's like, thank God for that.
I tell you what was quite surreal about that day. I remember quite vividly. I think the home end was just packed with QPR fans. It was really weird. I remember the lower Rouse. I think it was as you scored. The lower Rouse was like QPR fans.
Yeah.
What was that like to play it? I mean, I can't think if you've had an experience like that before, where literally away fans just piled into the home end. Yeah,
it's strange. It is strange, particularly at Watford, because you don't normally see that, particularly in that lower Rouse spot. But good. The atmosphere was brilliant. Yeah, I love those end of season games as well. Sun's out. You particularly when you're playing for something. That's kind of, you've worked all season, and you kind of get into the pinnacle. So they're always the best days.
I mean, now moving towards recent the last few years, you entered the Watford Hall of Fame, is it? I think 2 years ago. What was it like? Just local lad, played for the club twice, and to be honoured with that. How did it feel? Were you expecting it as well, or
no?
Was it out of the blue?
Yeah, it was completely out of the blue. I didn't really know they did things like that, to be honest. So that was lovely. It was really, really nice because it's very strange when you retire because you just kind of disappear and you know, it's like you're forgotten about almost. So I can't remember saying to my wife about a year after I retired, it just kind of like, it's weird. It's, you know, you're doing a job and then the season ends and I was trying to get a club when I retired. I left Brentford at the end of, God, what season was it now? I can't remember, but 2015, maybe 16, something like that. So I was still looking for a club, but I ended up not finding one. And I thought, do you know what? I was being a bit too picky. I wanted to stay local, but I didn't want to drop down the league. So I was just being probably more speculative than anything. And then, so I just came home one day. I went, look, I think that's enough, really. I'll just move on. So it's really weird because you then, after a year or so, you start looking back and think, God, I'm starting to really miss it now. And, you know, what do I do? How do I get back into it? I don't want to be a coach. I had another venture that, you know, I own kind of some property companies and stuff. So I've got stuff going on, but, you know, football's in the blood, really, has been forever. So when the club called and said, this is what we're doing for you, we want you to come to the end of season awards, we've given you a table for your family to come along. Yeah, it was really special. It was lovely. Really, really nice.
What does that role, Tommy, involve now with Watford? Because I always see you in the corner watching with Luther. What does that role involve now? Is it hospitality? Is it something more of an ambassadorial role?
Technically it's an ambassador role. But so as it stands, mainly it's just kind of doing the Saturday role whereby I just go around the corporate lounges, talk to guests, just have a chat, kind of make them feel, you know, obviously it's quite expensive, so it's quite, you know, it's lovely over there. It's amazing what they've done from when I used to play there. It's like one of these trendy nightclubs in London when you turn up. But yeah, it's expensive. So yeah, for us, it's just trying to make their days as good as possible. Go around, talk to them, talk about the game, if they've got any questions, you know, that kind of thing. And then I get to watch the game as well. So it's, you know, it's great fun. It's good. But then technically, it's an ambassador role. So I'll do other things, you know, if the club want me to go to certain things.
I've seen you on Sky Sports a couple of times doing TV Punches. Was that something you wanted to get into when you were playing, or was it something you kind of stumbled across it?
It was more something I stumbled into as I retired. I had some friends that worked at Sky and they just said, look, would you be interested? So I went on Sky Sports News for a panel, sat on that a couple of times, and then started to do a few games. So yeah, I did get into it. I was quite enjoying it, but it's, you know, I find with things like that, you need to be pushing it, and I was busy, so I'm quite laid back when it comes to things like that. If they want me to go on it, great, give me a call. I'm not going to be pestering you saying, can I come on at this game? Can I do that? And I think you kind of get your foot in the door. You probably need to do things like that. And I'm not that kind of character. So
we need you on Monday Night Football arguing with Carragher and Neville. You know, stepping up for Watford a bit more.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'd love to do it, but you know, there are guys that want to make careers out of that, and I'm not. I'm not going to make it a career for me. I like doing it, and I'll nip in and I'll do it. Great, but I'm busy with other bits and family and what I do for Watford now. So I'm more than happy if they want me to go on there. Great, but I won't I'm not going to pursue it.
Top man. Right, just to wrap up the interview, we're just going to do a little Q&A section. We've got a few questions sent in from Watford fans. Okay. So first one comes in from Aaron_Bennett10, who says, if you could choose any Watford player, past or present, to play alongside, who would it be?
That's a good question. I actually never played with Troy, so I think when I left, I think Troy signed. It was the same season. So I think we'd have played up front together quite well, actually. I quite like playing with a big man. I played with Darius Henderson, and we got on quite well, like Gifton. So I think Troy would have been a good guy to play with. So probably him, and also Luther. I would have loved to have. Obviously, I see Luther quite a lot. So there's been a few games on Match of the Day on Saturday afternoons and stuff, and there was one the other day with Watford away at Arsenal, and Luther was up front. And I was watching it thinking, I tell you what, he'd have been good to play with as well.
This question is from Liam Lowry, I think it is. with the exception of Troy, who would you say is the most talented player in the squad at the moment?
I think for potential wise, Sarr is the one that is the obvious answer, because to me, with his pace and the way he dribbles with the ball and how direct he is, I was thinking he could be a hell of a player here. And now he's added goals to his game. I think he could be quite special. So for me, if we're talking potential, without a doubt him. I reckon probably Delafeu is the one that you look at and you think, he could play at a higher level at a bigger club if he can get his attitude right and become a bit more, consistent with the way he plays. But I have to say his attitude seems to have been brilliant under Pearson. He looks like he's a new player. So hopefully we'll get more and more out of him. Obviously he's injured now, but that was a real shame. So they're probably the two, I would say, probably the most talented.
Ryan Morgan Media, who says he wants to hear about the move to Portsmouth. Is it true there was already a press conference lined up to announce the move to Reading and Rodgers?
This is probably my most interesting story when it comes to my move. Most of them are pretty standard, but this one was quite funny actually, because I'd left to go and to sign for Reading, so I'd done medical, agreed terms. And they had a Tuesday night game, and I left in the morning, and they said, come back suited and we'll parade you on the pitch before the game, and then we'll get you in the director's box and you can sign the contract and stuff. So I was like, great. So I came home, got suited and booted, left at about 4:00, got about 20 miles around the corner. I got a call from my agent saying Watford have just had a bid from Portsmouth accepted as well. I think you should listen to what they're saying. So I was like, I don't know. It doesn't make me feel very comfortable. I've agreed to go to Reading. It's it's all done. I don't really, it's not fair. And he said, well, look, you're doing yourself an injustice unless you don't speak. As Paul Hart was the manager. They've agreed a fee. He wants to sign you. He wants you down there straight away. So I was like, okay. So I spoke to Paul Hart, and obviously Portsmouth are in the Premier League then. And I think that for me was a real pull. And he said, look, Tom, I've seen you play your last few games for Watford. You're what we need. I want to play you centre forward, which I was a bit like, okay, that sounds good. You played wing, but the year before at Watford, I played a lot through the middle. So he said, look, come and play either up front or in the hole, but you'd be my main man going forward. And it was just too good an opportunity to not take, unfortunately. So I had to call Brendan straight away after and just say, look, I'm not coming. I can't. I felt dreadful, but it's Premier League football, and I couldn't turn it down. There would be a 4-year deal on Premier League football, and I just couldn't turn that down. I mean, I'd be mad to not have taken that move.
I can't imagine the people organising the halftime entertainment at Reading were too happy as well.
Just talking about it makes me feel terrible, because it's such a, really they should have got me to sign while I was there in the morning, and then it would have been done and dusted. Yeah. But they didn't, and that's what makes me feel even worse, because it was the 11th hour. And the funniest thing was that my wife had no idea that any of this was going on. So about half an hour after I left, I walked back in, and she said, "What's the matter?" I was like, "Oh, well, I'm not going Reading now." And she was like, I was like, no, I'm going the other way.
Just out of interest, Tommy, what is it? I know you explained the story, but what is it like being involved in like a deadline day sort of transfer? Because we see all the Jim White on Sky Sports News. It's made out to be this massive event.
Yeah.
I've had a number of stories from players. It's not as glamorous as it seems. Like it is it's a very stressful time.
Yeah, very. Yeah, very. I've had a few deadline moves. One, when I moved to QPR from Portsmouth, we didn't get it done in time. So I ended up having to be a loan deal. And then I signed in the January. But yeah, it is quite stressful. It is. And the problem you've got is that contracts now are or they're probably even more so detailed now than when I signed this one. But there's so many small, finer detailed bits that go into it. When you're trying to negotiate with owners and managers and agents and players, it can take a while to get it sorted. So it's quite hard to rush something through like that. But it can be really stressful. because you're uprooting, and if you've got family as a player, you're not just thinking about what club you're signing for. You're thinking about, where am I going to live? Am I going to move my kids? What am I going to do with my house? How does it affect everything? So there's a lot to take into account.
Just final question, Tommy. The Q&A section is favourite goal you ever scored in your career?
It would have to be my first goal against QPR. I think that would be my favourite goal, looking back. A few good ones to remember and big ones, but that was probably my favourite when I look back over everything.
Brilliant. Tommy, I really do appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on, buddy.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you could follow Tommy, we'll leave his Instagram in the description below. Give him a follow. If you can leave a like on the video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you very, very soon.